And a live picture this afternoon on Capitol Hill where the Tea Party Patriots are about to gather to hold a press conference on gun legislation and protecting Second Amendment rights. As this briefing is about to get underway, The Hill is reporting here Senate Republicans are responding cautiously to a new proposal to expand background checks for gun sales that the Trump administration is circulating on Capitol Hill. President Trump has yet to endorse the proposal, but the White House is taking the temperature of Senate Republican support for the idea. Quote, there are some ideas floating around that different members of the administration are coming up with. At this point, it's probably too early to say if Republicans will support it. That from Senate Republican Whip John Thune of South Dakota. You can read that entire story in The Hill today. And again, waiting for the Tea Party Patriots news conference to get underway on gun legislation and protecting Second Amendment rights. Live coverage here on C-SPAN.
I've got to find those earplugs. Thank you. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Bottom line is, all right, talk to me.
They'll turn off your electricity. They don't have to come.
I would love. I was thinking about having, and I'm national. I mean, when I'm
I mean, we're not quite sure where it's coming
I have different emotions. So what is that? See, I'm
Maybe here when come out with that.
but it's stores.
Second Amendment at a time when you're seeing a attack. Saw the president.
Thank you so much for being here today. I'm Jenny Beth Martin, the honorary chairman of Tea Party Patriots Action. And we are doing this press conference today to talk about the Second Amendment and the importance of the Second Amendment. I need to find my statement, which I've apparently misplaced. Our speakers today are members of Congress, survivors of mass shootings, or family members whose loved ones were murdered in mass shootings. Everyone up here today wants to defend our Second Amendment rights, and we have solutions that can actually help save lives without infringing on the rights of innocent Americans. I'm not standing here today just as a conservative activist. defending my own God-given rights and to protect myself and to defend my family. I'm standing here today as a mother of teenagers. They're twins whose school nearly became another statistic and another tragedy. 2 students at their school had detailed plans to mass murder their peers. And due to the diligent work of Sheriff Reynolds and others in my county, and Sheriff Reynolds is here today, these 2 people who were trying to do this to my children's school were stopped before they could hurt or kill anyone. These teenagers were tried and convicted as adults and were sentenced to 40 years, 20 years in prison and 20 years parole. All of that occurred without any new so-called red flag laws or any violations of my rights or of your rights. There are policies, practices, and laws in place already that can stop shooters before they kill. Conversely, there are policies that have been enacted over the years, like those in Broward County, Florida, that paved the way for the shooter to do what he did. And I will be reading a statement from Max Eden, who that goes through that. As a mom who let her children go back to school after knowing that they could have been victims of a school shooting, I categorically reject efforts by Democrats or Republicans to trample on the rights of innocent Americans when we know what works and we know what doesn't. We know that gun control, including red flag laws, are wrong, ethically, morally, and constitutionally. Parents like me across this country call on Congress to stop eroding and attacking innocent Americans in their quest for power. With that, I'd like to bring up Republican Whip Steve Scalise.
Thank you, Jenny Beth. And I want to thank you for taking the leadership and bringing this forward, because right now, coming out of this Capitol, we're hearing a lot of talk by Speaker Pelosi and a lot of her allies that have been wanting for a long time to take away the rights, those Second Amendment rights that are so cherished of law-abiding citizens. Like, these rights did not come easily. And anytime you hear somebody talking about taking away our Second Amendment rights, people need to listen up and pay close attention. When you look at what's going on right now, it seems like, unfortunately, every time there's a mass shooting, I can tell you firsthand, the first thing we all ought to do is pray. Pray for the victims. And there's still people around this building that want to push prayer further out of that conversation. But unfortunately, the first time we hear about a tragedy, before we even know the facts, there are people right here on Capitol Hill that are rushing to find a microphone, not to pray for the victims, but to promote their own gun control agenda. In most cases, for bills that would have done absolutely nothing to affect the shooting. And so as we're having this conversation here again on Capitol Hill, let's take a look at some of the things that Speaker Pelosi has been promoting. Because again, we ought to take her at our word. When she says she wants these bills to be signed into law, look at the bill that she moved out of the House, that I voted against and so many of my colleagues voted against, because they would infringe on the rights of law-abiding citizens. They wouldn't have stopped the Charleston shooting. They wouldn't have stopped Sutherland Springs. They wouldn't have stopped even Parkland. What they would do is put you in jail for up to a year if you loan your gun to a friend. Make it to where somebody might have to wait up to 20 days to buy a gun to defend themselves against an ex-spouse who might be threatening to come and abuse them. There are people who use guns legally every single day to protect themselves from criminals. And we ought to fight to protect the rights of those law-abiding citizens to continue to defend themselves as the Second Amendment of the Constitution allows. These are not rights that Congress gave. These are enshrined in our Constitution. Our founding fathers talked about the rights of law-abiding citizens to defend themselves. And I think that ought to be at the forefront of this conversation every step of the way through. Because when you look at some of the threats that are coming out, it's very concerning to think that Speaker Pelosi, and then you watched on the stage at the Democrat debate, when you had a major candidate for president of the United States brag about how he wanted to take and come and grab your guns. People are watching this. People are concerned about where the radical left wants to go. Because I would imagine if you asked Democrats here in Washington, if you asked them what they think about the Heller case, Just think about this. Right across the street at that building at the Supreme Court, just a few years ago, they answered the question of whether or not the Second Amendment means that you as a citizen should be able to have a gun to protect yourself, or should that right only apply to the military? And it was only a 5-4 decision by one vote. So I would ask every Democrat that talks about where they want to go with the Second Amendment, do they think that the Heller case was resolved correctly or incorrectly by the Supreme Court? I think the Supreme Court got it right. I'm just concerned that it was a 5-4 decision, not a 9-0 decision, making it clear that those Second Amendment rights apply to all Americans, not just the United States military. So as you're hearing people state their intentions, again, Speaker Pelosi has said that she's already laying down a marker with President Trump. She's saying it's not enough to go anywhere short of the bill that she moved out of the House. And again, that bill would make it a criminal offense, up to a year in jail if you loan your gun to a friend. That's where Speaker Pelosi wants to go. It's real important that we fight to protect the Second Amendment rights for law-abiding citizens. Let's go make sure, like what we did with the Fix NICS bill last Congress, where we saw problems with criminals who shouldn't have been able to buy guns, getting guns because the system wasn't working properly for law-abiding citizens. Let's go focus on fixing those problems and not taking away the rights of law-abiding citizens. So again, Jenny Beth, thank you for your leadership. And are you introducing my good friend, or am I? Another champion in this fight, somebody who I came into Congress in the same class with back in the 2006 to 2008 Congress, is a champion for all of our constitutional rights, but especially our Second Amendment rights. My friend from Ohio, Congressman Jim Jordan.
Well done. Thank you, Steve. Well said. Jenny Beth, thank you. We should be focused on enforcing the law. We should be focused on people who use a gun in a crime, prosecuting them to the fullest extent of the law. Instead, last week, just 1 week ago, in the House Judiciary Committee, the committee most responsible for protecting your fundamental liberties, your constitutional rights, in the House Judiciary Committee, they inverted the standard. The standard we've all know about that makes America this great special place that we are, where you are innocent until presumed guilty. They inverted the standard, and they passed legislation which said, no, you are now guilty until you can prove your innocence. Even though you've done nothing wrong, not been charged with any crime, done nothing wrong, someone thinks you might, you lose your Second Amendment rights, and you lose those at a court proceeding that you're not even allowed to attend to defend yourself. So I am proud to stand here today with conservatives, people who want to stand for the Second Amendment, stand for the Bill of Rights, stand for the Constitution, stand for fundamental liberty, and stand for that sacred standard in our country that says you are innocent until proven guilty in this country. And I appreciate the leadership of our whip, of Jenny Beth Martin, and the next individual who's the head of the Second Amendment caucus, who has done more to stand up for the Second Amendment than anyone in the United States Congress, Thomas Massey from Kentucky.
There have been a lot of proposals here in this Capitol recently. I think we need a waiting period. We need a waiting period for legislators to cool down, because they are introducing legislation that would not solve the problem. They would make the problem worse. What I have here in my hand is a 2010 report. This is the last year there was any study of any kind by the DOJ on whether anybody actually got prosecuted for trying to buy a gun and failing the NICS background check system. Now, why did they stop producing this report? I asked Inspector General Horowitz that today. He's going to look into it. What does this report show about background checks, which are supposedly the panacea? If we just had more of them, we could solve all these problems. Wrong. There have already been two bills. There was the NICS Improvement Amendments Act, and then there was the Fix NICS Act, and now they're trying to do universal background checks. This report, and I'll tell you why they don't publish it anymore, is because what's in it. This report shows there were 72,000 denials. How many people were prosecuted? 30 prosecutions out of 72,000 denials and 13 convictions. What does that tell you? It tells you one of two things. Either the people in this Capitol are not serious about prosecuting law offenders, or, which is what we all actually know, those 72,000 denials, a vast majority of them were false denials where law-abiding citizens were denied their constitutional right to keep and bear arms. Why in the world would we expand something that doesn't work? That's the question I have for my colleagues here in Congress, and I yield back to Jenny Beth.
Thank you very much, Congressman Massey. And
assault weapons.
next, we're going to Congressman Andy Biggs, who has just been elected to the House Freedom Caucus as the chairman.
Yeah, thank you. It's really an honor to be with you today and talk about one of our God-given rights. The founders of this country established and recognized, they didn't establish, but they recognized the Second Amendment in the Bill of Rights. And what they said basically is you have a right to defend yourself against wrongdoers and also against a tyrannical government. That's what the Second Amendment was about. And when we talk about following the law, I think of a case that just came out of Minnesota not too long ago. A young man killed someone with a gun, put a gun against their head and killed them. You know what he was sentenced to? 10 months. 10 months. Who knows how long he'll serve? You have to enforce the law. You have to provide the deterrent. When Thomas Massey talks about background checks, he's exactly right. They're not working, and the reason they're not working is because you put garbage in, you get garbage out.
Absolutely.
And what you have going on is you have 72,000 people denied, but there's only enough evidence to prosecute 13, which tells you have a whole lot of false positives, which is also why we're not even looking at it anymore. So Thomas is exactly right on that point. And I'll just finish with this thought. You know what drives the evil and the mass killings that we see from time to time in this country? It isn't the instrumentality. It is evil in the hearts of somebody. And that evil is allowed to corrupt and corrode because we are attacking persistently the institutions which are designed and recognized by the founders and by the framers, and until 60, 70 years ago, were respected throughout this country. I'm talking religious institutions, I'm talking familial institutions, I'm talking the family and churches. If you want to see a renaissance of a period of time where you're not going to see mass shootings, you're not going to see the alienation that comes and that seems to be the cause of some of these evil acts, you have to acknowledge that the institutions in this country need to be reformed as much as anything else. The Second Amendment deserves to be protected. I deserve to have my rights. Everyone here deserves to have their right to carry and bear an arm. And with that, I'm going to stand with my colleagues who are here today, and there are many more in this body that are going to stand and fight for the Second Amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Congressman Biggs. And next, we are going to Congressman Barry Loudermilk.
Thank you, Jenny Beth. I'm standing here today because of one person, Steve Scalise. If Steve Scalise had not shown up for our last baseball practice with his 2 armed law enforcement officers, I would not be standing here talking to you today. In a sense, Steve took a bullet for me and all the others that were on the baseball field on June the 12th, 2017. Now, Steve was at second base. I was at home plate when the shooting started. I was able to make myself to get outside of the field where I found one other of our staff members had been shot in the back and a bullet came out his chest. I spent the rest of the 8 minutes of that shooting trying to get to him to help save his life. But as I was pinned down behind that SUV, I never once thought, wait till I get to Capitol Hill, I'm going to pass a law. You know why? Because the gentleman, let me rephrase that, the radicalized, crazed madman who was shooting that gun was already violating dozens of state and federal laws. There is not a single law that we would have passed that would have made a difference to him. He was there to commit the ultimate of crimes in this nation, which is murder. Another felony or another misdemeanor would have made no difference because the problem was the shooter. A couple of months after that, someone tried to assassinate me and my wife as we were driving up a highway in Georgia. Again, I never once thought, wait till I go back to Washington, I'm going to pass a law. When I was pinned down on the baseball field, the thought that kept coming through my mind is, where are the good guys with the guns? If this would have happened in Georgia, it would have not lasted that long, because I would have had access to a weapon. My chief of staff would have had an access to a weapon. And I can promise you that that shooter would not have gotten off the number of rounds that he got off. The laws that are being proposed by the Democrats today would do nothing to stop the mass shootings in this nation. And that's coming from someone who's experienced that on multiple occasions. We need to get to the source of the problem, which is the radicalized individuals that seek to do violence against law-abiding citizens instead of restricting their ability to have access to defend themselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Congressman. And now we're going to Congressman Chip Roy.
Thanks, Jenny Beth. Thanks for gathering this group together. I'm glad to be here with everybody up here, particularly my fellow Texan. As a Texan, obviously, we've been dismayed by the tragedies of late in Odessa and El Paso. Our hearts and prayers, yes, our prayers go out to the families and to the people associated. I was in church, in a Baptist church in Austin, Texas, and the pastor of the church in Odessa, where one of the congregants had been fallen, they called us specifically and asking us to join in prayer. So these communities do want that. They do want that support. Let me just tell you, from the standpoint of a Texan, I can tell you, for the people that I represent, and I don't represent the NRA, I don't represent Gun Owners of America, I don't represent any constituency other than the 800,000 plus people that elected me to come here and stand up and defend their rights to defend themselves, to protect themselves against any intruders or people who don't follow the law that might risk them and their families, but also against tyranny, against the size and scope of a government that wants to look at you and tell you that, like a certain Democratic candidate, that they're going to come take your God-given right to bear arms to defend yourself. This is why the founders gave us this power. It is the last bulwark against tyranny in the world. Everywhere we have seen in the history of mankind, a disarmed population results in tyranny. Tyranny over the mind of man. Tyranny over our liberties. I was a federal prosecutor, a special assistant United States attorney, tasked with going after people who misuse weapons, felons in possession, people using weapons to move narcotics. And I was very proud to prosecute a lot of them, put them behind bars. That's where they should be. Everybody standing up here wants to enforce the law, ensure those who want to do us harm don't have access to weapons and are behind bars. Every single one of us has stood up to do that. But we should not confuse stopping those who are looking to harm us, who have harmed us, who are felons and lawbreakers, with interfering with our God-given rights. Yes. This lies at the core of who it is, who we are as a people, as Americans. This is at the core of our founding. It is critical for the future of this country, the future of freedom, that we stand up and defend this core right that is God-given, not man-given through the Second Amendment. God gave you the right. And this is the right to be able to defend our families, defend our freedoms, and to be able to stand up in defense of our nation and our liberties. With that, I'll turn it back over to Jenny Beth.
Thank you very much, Congressman. The next congressman we have speaking is also from the great state of Texas, and it's Louie Gohmert.
Yeah. So there are people that are amongst us that want to take away your rights, your constitutional rights. I go back to what John Adams said when he was our second president. He said, this Constitution was intended for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate for the government of any other. And he was right. So in the last half a decade or so, as we have taken 10 commandments out, we quit telling young school kids that it's wrong to covet or be jealous of other people or the things they have. And in fact, as Washington, more and more people here are playing division politics. They're saying, well, they didn't make that. They didn't build that. You ought to have that. That ought to belong to all of us. And they have played division politics. They've made people jealous, not understanding that one of the basic tenets of mankind, if you want peace, is not to be jealous, not to demand what somebody else has. But it's far better to have a constitution that allows us to pursue those things. But as we've seen division politics play out, we've seen anger, we've seen hate build, not diminish. Since hate crime laws were passed, hate's increased. But I'm telling you, if we don't get back to teaching what is moral instead of moral relativism, we're going to have to do away with the right to assemble, because things we say will make people mad and they may want to shoot somebody. Or we'll have to do away with free speech because people disagree with others and they'll even shout and try to disrupt a press conference because they have not been taught right from wrong. They have not been taught decency. So when we get back to teaching decency, you will see the mass shootings stop, because we respect each other more than some amongst us do now. So anyway, if we can do that, then we'll see the mass shootings stop. We'll see a freer country. But otherwise, you're going to have to get rid of the Second Amendment, all of those promises, the First Amendment. Some people's religion makes other people mad. But you're going to have different Congress members than you got up here, because we're not going to vote to do away with constitutional rights. So why not get back to teaching right and wrong? Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we have one more congressman.
Won't be afraid.
Excuse me?
We have one more congressman. It is Congressman Ralph Norman from South Carolina.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here to stand with these patriots behind me, who will protect our God-given rights, who will protect the Second Amendment. And I will say two things. Steve Scalise, who was here earlier, is a victim. If anybody knows about the horrors of a shooting that he endured, it's him. He would want common sense legislation. That's why he is against these red flag laws. He's against those politicians that put their finger in the air and say, let's just confiscate every gun. And it's hearing words from him that make such a difference. And you know who the second group of people who have been left out in this whole discussion? This police officer right here.
Yeah, yes.
Police officers from Georgia who all over this country, they face the end of a barrel every day they go to work. They have been left out of the discussion on what they could do. And I will say this, there were 30,000 deaths last year from gun shootings. Guess what? 65% were from suicides. Guess what? The four cities with the worst murder rates, most horrible murder rates, are those with the strictest gun controls. Guns don't kill people, people do. It's a mental issue. It's up to us with coming up with common sense legislation. But I will tell you, it's not the red flag laws. And I will tell you, as Winston Churchill said, there'll be a time when doing your best isn't good enough. We must do what's required. Do what's required to protect the Second Amendment.
Thank you, Congressman. The next speaker is not here. He was involved in a car accident. He'll be here later this afternoon, and he'll be available if you want to talk to him, you who are members of the press. And you may want to. He is a Republican leader in the Colorado legislature. He is Patrick Neville. He's a Columbine shooter. He is a Columbine survivor. And I have his statement printed. I could read it, but I don't think that I can do it justice because it's in his own words. So please take a look at the statement that we have printed and available for you. One thing that is important to note is that he is a Columbine survivor. He was there the day two students came into his school and killed his friends and his classmates. He understands the anger and hurt of tragic shootings. It was a day that will stay with him for the rest of his life. No child should have to endure that. A national red flag law wouldn't have stopped the tragedy at his high school. If we pass a national red flag law, it will not stop mass shootings. It will cause a tragedy. It will take away the rights of law-abiding gun owners. It will take away their due process rights. Okay, next we have the sheriff from my county, Cherokee County, Georgia, Sheriff Frank Reynolds. He and his department, along with the local school police, prevented a mass shooting from happening at my children's high school.
Good afternoon. As a sheriff in Georgia, I'm elected by the people. Each county, all 159 counties in the state of Georgia, elect 4 constitutional officers. The sheriff is one of them. And when I raised my hand to swear an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States and the state of Georgia, I meant that. My concern is when people use rhetoric like, we're going to come and take your guns, that it's going to put our deputies, our law enforcement officers at risk. I think it's irresponsible. And quite frankly, when we say that we're going to defend the Constitution, we're not going door to door and confiscating guns. That's not what the Constitution says. It says shall not be infringed. In this particular case that Jenny Beth talks about, working collaboratively with our other law enforcement, our school officials, we were able to stop a potential attack or an impending attack. And I can just tell you that the thousands, tens of thousands of men and women in uniform need your help in finding laws on mental health. I mean, that's one of the biggest issues that we deal with. Quite frankly, using some of the laws that we have in place. I don't think creating more laws is going to do anything. It's just going to hinder the process. Thank you for this opportunity to come here today, and y'all have a great day.
Thank you very much, Sheriff. Next, we have former state representative from the state of Louisiana, and also the chairman of the Family Research Council, which was attacked in gun violence, Tony Perkins.
Thank you, Jenny Beth, for organizing this, and it's great to be here with a lot of my friends, all straight shooters. Look, I've seen the results of gun violence up close and personal, both as a police officer, spending 10 years in law enforcement in Louisiana, and also as the president of the Family Research Council here in Washington, D.C., that was the target of a gunman inspired by the Southern Poverty Law Center, one of the organizations crying out for gun control. Floyd Lee Corkins illegally, now for some, I need to explain that, illegally means against the law, meaning that DC gun control laws did not prevent him from carrying a 9mm pistol and 100 rounds of ammunition, along with 15 Chick-fil-A sandwiches he intended to stuff into the mouths of his victims. Because of DC gun laws, there was no one in our building that had a gun that could stop him. So he shot the first person that he saw, an unarmed building manager, critically wounding him on his way to shoot the rest of the nearly 100 people in our building. By God's grace, Leo Johnson, critically wounded, still managed to stop and disarm Floyd Lee Corkins from accomplishing his mission of mass murder. Corkins is now serving 25 years in prison, being convicted of domestic terrorism, the first man convicted under DC's domestic terrorism law. Now, some of the strictest gun control laws in the nation, right here in Washington, D.C., did not prevent a criminal from perpetrating a crime that could have been much, much worse. But the gun laws did succeed in preventing innocent people from protecting themselves. and thereby creating more victims of gun violence. Now, let me say this, and it's already been said, but for the benefit of some in the media, let me say it again. The growing problem of gun violence is not the absence of laws. It's the absence of morality. The result of the left's unrelenting assault on religious freedom in the public square. It is the result of the very ones who are crying for gun control on their half-century march through the institutions of America, driving God from the public square and denying our children the freedom of religion. They've gone after the First Amendment. Now they want the Second Amendment, and I say no way. Now, I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I will sit down with those on the other side of this issue and have a discussion about if there are laws that might need to be changed or added to address gun violence, but only if they are willing to look beyond the instruments of violence. You see, we must go beyond the symptoms to the source. Why is there such a disregard for our fellow human beings? That gunmen can go into a shopping center and kill children and not think twice about it? I know the answer to that question, and I think the other side knows it just as well, and that's why they won't sit down and have a discussion.
Thank you very much, Tony. Next we have Alec Scarlatos. Alec was a specialist in the Oregon Army National Guard and was deployed to Afghanistan in 2014 to 2015. On August 21st, 2015, while vacationing in Europe with his friends, Alec was instrumental in stopping a mass shooting by a terrorist on a Paris-bound train. Shortly after returning home from deployment, he was awarded the French Legion d'Honneur, I probably totally mispronounced that, the Belgian Civic Service Medal, the Army Soldiers Medal, and the Oregon Distinguished Service Medal. Alec.
Well, thank you all for coming out. I appreciate it. My life experiences have taught me the importance of the Second Amendment. Police cannot be everywhere, and gun-free zones never achieve their intended goal of stopping violence. It's a lesson we have learned many times over, but politicians in D.C. can't seem to wrap their heads around the idea that for once, giving people their rights back instead of taking them away might be the solution. In August 2015, my friends and I stopped a terrorist on a train to Paris, and even though we were in an area that doesn't have a Second Amendment and is much more hostile to civilian gun ownership, the terrorist was able to get a fully automatic AK-47 and a handgun. Not even 2 months later, there was a shooting at my former community college where, while it wasn't illegal, no one carried a gun because the school had a policy against it, and as a result, 9 people were killed. Only a week after that, Spencer, one of my friends from the terrorist attack, went out to the bars in downtown Sacramento with a group of friends. He had turned down an offer to take my younger brother's Glock with him because it was illegal to conceal carry in California. That night, he was nearly stabbed to death by a gang of 5 people. Violence is violence, and guns aren't the problem. The only people that obey the law are law-abiding citizens. So if you're planning mass murder, gun control laws obviously won't stop you. That is one of the many reasons why I'm running for office in 2020 in Oregon, because gun control fails and gun control policies only hurt law-abiding citizens. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alec. Next, we have JT Lewis. JT is widely known as the 19-year-old brother of Sandy Hook shooting victim Jesse Lewis, one of the 20 murder victims in Newtown, Connecticut on December 14, 2012. He became an advocate for stronger school security measures, including arming personnel. Lewis backs gun control laws, but said far less attention has been paid to security and funding programs to mental health needs. Through these efforts, he has met both Presidents Obama and Trump. JT?
Yeah.
Thank you for having me, Jenny Beth. My name is JT Lewis, and I lost my brother Jesse in the Sandy Hook shooting almost 7 years ago. And I'm going to start with a little story about Jesse. That day, the shooter shot out the glass front doors of the elementary school and entered my brother's classroom. He shot a few students, and his gun jammed or ran out of bullets, and this is all documented in an FBI report. In that interval, Jesse yelled out for his classmates to run, and 9 of them did, and he's credited with saving 9 lives. Now, I want everyone in the media to look behind you and around you. We're all protected here by armed officers. They're here for the representatives behind me, great people. But don't you think that my brother deserved the same liberties that they have right here, the same protection in their schools? But he didn't get it. He was left alone in there to fend for himself and to protect his students, something that a 6-year-old should never have to do. I'll leave you with a thought. After every shooting, we look to our president and to our representatives for change and hope. We've looked to them from President Clinton to President Bush, to President Obama to President Trump, hoping that they will enact change. The thought I want to leave you with is perhaps we're looking at the wrong person for change. Perhaps we're looking at the wrong group for change. Maybe we need to look at ourselves. And that's why I'm running for state senate in Connecticut, where I hope that with the platform that Connecticut has after experiencing a shooting like that, we can change the country, enact bipartisan solutions to these shootings, not things that we've seen from Republicans and Democrats. I want bipartisan solutions, things that can be accomplished. And there's things out there. We need guards in schools, and that's something that I'm fighting for in Connecticut. And so thank you all for listening to me. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, JT. The last speaker is not able to be here. Again, I have a written statement from him. I'll just let you know who it is. He is available for interviews by phone, and his co-author is as well. Max Eden was going to be our last speaker. He's an education policy expert at a New York City-based think tank. He's a co-author of the book Why Meadow Died, The People and Policies That Created the Parkland Shooter and Endanger America's Students. Both Max and his co-author, Andrew Pollack, whose daughter Meadow died in Parkland, are available if you want to interview with them. Max's statement is this: I've never lost a loved one in a shooting, but Max spent the past year and a half working with Andrew Pollack, who lost his daughter Meadow in the Parkland shooting. While some students rushed to blame the gun, Andrew wanted to know what went wrong so that we can take meaningful, concrete steps to fix it. The Parkland shooting was one of the most avoidable mass murders in American history, but politically correct education policies that were pioneered in Broward and spread across America by the Obama administration made the unimaginable inevitable. Parents need to understand the policies that caused Parkland They need to understand that the policies that caused Parkland have come to their children's schools as well. And with that, we'll open it for questions. If there are there any questions?
Congressman Massey, so AG bars on the Hill today. There's been a proposal circulating that would expand background checks to commercial sales, including at gun shows, consistent with Manchitumi. Where do you stand on that proposal that's been circulating?
We shouldn't seek to expand something that's terribly broken. As I said in my earlier statements, the last time they published the statistics for the NICS background check system, it showed that it's terribly broken. There were only 30 people prosecuted out of 72,000 denials. Only 13 convictions resulted from that. So some people say, oh, what's the harm? What if we just stop one shooting? Show me the shooting it would stop. You can't find that shooting. And the harm is that you, in the meantime, with this background check system has denied millions of people who should have been eligible to purchase a gun their God-given right to exercise their right to self-defense.
Any other questions?
Also for Congressman Massey.
Who are you with?
The Hill. Congressman, last week, Beto O'Rourke said at the Democratic presidential debate, he called for a mandatory gun buyback program and said, yes, we will take your AR-15s, your AK-47s. Can you comment on that?
Well, let's give him points for honesty. That is what nearly every person in there that's for what they call common sense gun control would prefer. They would prefer to take every single gun back. That is a recipe for destroying this country, is what that is. But at least he's being honest, because some people say, oh, nobody wants to take your guns, or nobody wants to take your hunting rifle. When they exercise an unconstitutional red flag order at your house, do you think they're going to say, give us everything but the hunting rifle? Hell no. They're going to say, give us everything, including the BB gun. They're going to take everything from you. And this is, Beto's proposition is the first step in a full confiscation. That's the other problem with the background check system, is basically you're creating a de facto registry, which is a necessary precursor to Beto's plan of confiscation.
Okay, we're supposed to only be here until for 45 minutes, which we have done. So we're going to break up, but we're around. If you have any other questions, you're welcome to come and ask people individually the questions. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you.
Get started.
And earlier today, the Democratic House